A fantastic day to all of you. This is your host, Sasi Casas, and I am happy to be back in this episode of The Leader's Edge. We are now on our sixth episode of Season 10. In this episode, we will talk about how we can take control of our future and be an entrepreneur. And since we are in the day and age of startups and Kickstarters, this will be an interesting discussion. And our guest for today is quite an expert in this subject. A graduate of Ateneo School of Business, a former general manager of Quenhin Nagel SSC Inc., former vice president of JP Morgan Chase and Company. He is now the CEO and co-founder of Experience Plus Inc. There are a lot of lists of his achievements, and I will allow him to talk about more about this. Ladies and gentlemen, let us all welcome our guest for tonight, for today, Darwin John Moises. Darwin, a pleasant day to you.
Good day, Sasi, and good day to all our viewers. Yes, but you can also call me DJ. That's my short name. So just a brief introduction of myself, aside from what you already shared. So while I'm based here in Cebu, but my family is really from the northern part of Mindanao, and that's Iligan City. Although I've been in Cebu for over 30 years already. So I've been in the corporate setup for the past 27 years, 25 years as a manager, operations director, GM, vice president before I decided to start my own business. So I'm now the co-founder and also CEO of an organization that we founded early this year, and it's called XP Plus for Experience Plus.
Okay, thank you very much. And I also read in your resume that you are a what's this, a columnist
Yeah,
in the Star. Is that correct?
yes, I am. So yes, it's a column in Sunstar. It's a local daily here in Cebu City. We started writing the column about 20 years ago. Yes, that's how old it is. So we started as a tandem. So I used to share it with a lawyer, but early this year we decided to have separate ways because she's also busy with her stint as the current president of the IBP, Cebu City chapter. So we decided to part ways and for me to continue writing the column. So it's a column supposedly for single professionals. I said supposedly because for some reason it has also evolved into a relationship advice column, which was not originally the intent, but I'm still happy to do that every time they ask questions that are specific to relationships.
Another interesting that I saw is that you are a lieutenant commander at Naval Reserve Command, Philippine Navy.
Yes, I am.
Um,
So yes. So yeah, I started collaborating with the Navy as a reserve officer last year, but the history started during the pandemic. So I volunteered on behalf of my club, which is Rotary Club of Cebu, volunteered in the food bank in which we prepared meals for certain locations in Cebu that could not actually have enough supply for themselves because they lost their jobs and they were also locked down. And the collaboration with the Navy brought to the opportunity, the possibility, and now the reality of serving with the Naval Reserve Force as a reserve officer.
okay, thank you very much for sharing that. Now, I have a question. How did you catch the desire to become an entrepreneur?
Okay, so there are actually three sets of stories that eventually converge into this particular path. So story number one is the possibility surfaced during the pandemic to do public service through the government agency route now. So it's like serving the country in through public service. So that's the first. And it's not necessarily new to me because both of my parents are also public servants. When my dad was alive and when my mom before her retirement. So it's not necessarily a strange path. However, I was also very sure that if I would pursue that route, I needed an alternative source of income. And why is that so? Because I thought that there's so much temptation in government service. So to keep me from that temptation is for me to have a stable stream of income. So that's the first side. The second is there was at that time an emerging advocacy which had something to do with the IT business process management space. I've seen how the space is making so much difference into Filipinos. It changes lives, so many lives for the better. It's an economic powerhouse because even amidst the pandemic, we actually saw growth in the industry in terms of revenue and headcount. So there's a lot of opportunities there. However, if we compare the Philippine market and the Indian market, which is considered to be the leader in that space, in the Indian market, it's composed of 70% local players and 30% multinational players. And that's not exactly the case that we have in the Philippines. What we have probably, I don't have the exact figure, but it's safe to say that 95% of the players in the industry are actually multinational. But we have enough expertise and leaders in this industry. So I also thought, why not also advance that advocacy by being an entrepreneur myself to be able to demonstrate that Filipinos in the IT BPM space need not be employees, they can also be entrepreneurs. So putting these two together, that's when my journey also started in terms of looking for investors. It's just that after so much hard work also, which kicked off October of last year, I was able to find an American organization, but one of them is a Filipino American. So that's how we were able to connect. And from then on, we started working on a full-blown feasibility study that brought us to where we are today.
Okay, amazing. I'm just curious, DJ. What
Yes.
was your first first business, and how old were you back then?
Sorry, the question is, what's my first business and
And
how?
how old were you back then?
How old I was back then. My first venture was an entirely different field, and then I can speak about the lessons learned also, given that first um, venture into being an entrepreneur. So it was a bakery,
Oh,
and I started it with a noble intent of it more of a social entrepreneurship project, if we call it that way, because I had members of the household, the driver and his wife, and I saw a lot of potential in them. So I thought that I could enable them by starting a small business, which is a bakery. And I was about 30 at that time, for them to be able to work and eventually build from there. But to make the long story short, it did not actually succeed as much as I wanted to. Profitable, yes. However, a lot of the effort actually had to come from me. So eventually I realized that it's not something that's sustainable considering that I was still working full time at a multinational back then. So we decided to just close the business.
amazing. Yeah. Um, Usually when we go into something, something inspired us or someone inspired us. In your case, who is your inspiration or role model, and why?
Okay. So for the first venture, it really came from a space of which is also another advocacy of mine. It actually came from a space of recognizing that there really are a lot of talented people around in that context. That's my driver and his wife, but it's just that they did not have the same access to education as much as I did. And so I thought I should be able to bridge that gap by providing them capital and then enabling them so that they can also grow and develop not just as household members or servants, if we call it that way, but for them to be able to eventually evolve and become an entrepreneur. So it's not necessarily a specific person, but I just saw an opportunity at that time. So that's for the first venture. For the second one, it's quite related to that because that's also the third reason. And then I'll just do an countdown. So that's the third reason. So it's also, it had something to do with the people also, because I saw, at least in my corporate experience, that there's also a need for people to have a safe space to be themselves, and that their only obligation is to want to be better at life, which is related to the first venture, the reason why I went into the first venture. The second is related to what I also said earlier. I just thought that there's so much talent in terms of leadership and expertise in the IT BPM space, but there's not many Filipinos actually who are going through or going towards the path of being an entrepreneur. So I thought that's also part of my calling to demonstrate that. And finally, I just believe in the Filipino talent and our capabilities. And it's about time that one day there's going to be a big company, that global company, that's primarily Filipino owned and Filipino led and operated. So those
Okay.
are the three motivations that I have. Why I
Okay.
started this business also.
Amazing. Thank you very much. Now, talking about entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs have been with us for a long, long time now, right? My dad was an entrepreneur, and comparing entrepreneurs with startup businesses and Kickstarters, are they the same or they are completely different? Or startup and Kickstarters are the new breed of entrepreneurs?
Well, I will have to agree with your last statement. They're not entirely different. They're very similar. It's just that, yes, for the tech startups, the path that I'm taking, we're just the new breed of entrepreneurs. So it's still the same risk taking, still the same due diligence and governance, still the same hard work that's also required for an entrepreneur to have and to be able to be willing and able to do every single day.
Yes. And the thing that I notice, comparing the past entrepreneurs to the present ones, is that in terms of support that are available for them, um, before there are banks, local
Mm,
government willing to grant some breaks and incentives for the new business to
mm,
begin. But now we have what we call the angel investors, the um, what's the other investors? The I forgot the name, but there are different types of investors that we have right now.
yes.
Um, is it safe for me to say that today's entrepreneurs are more blessed with investors?
I would think so. In my case, I also entertained the possibility of, because I've got a retirement savings, and my rule of thumb is never to touch that savings until I'm completely on retirement. So that could have been an option, but I didn't want to go that route. The second is, yes, to also present the feasibility study that I had, the concept that I had, the business concept that I had, and collaborate with the bank. But that's not necessarily the best option that I wanted to take. The first one, which eventually the one that pulled through, is really to talk to as many potential investors as possible and collaborate with them. So I'm just fortunate. If you will ask me, I think I talked to about 7 or 8 potential investors, and the one that pulled through was actually the last one, which was the eighth. No, so there's also an element of persistence and being relentless in pursuing one's dream. So that's how I got into this business, because eventually I found a company. They're called Selling Partners. They've been in the American market for over 30 years, and they've been also looking for opportunities on how they can establish a division here in the Philippines. So it's like the meeting of vision, no? that they had, and which I also have for this company, and that's how we decided to collaborate and form Experience Plus or XP Plus.
Oh, amazing. Oh, now I remember venture capitalists.
Oh yes.
Yeah, those are the capitalists that will eventually help someone with their businesses. Now,
Mhm.
is there a business model you think um, is both friendly to the business man and the market?
Mm. My take on that is a little bit different. So my take on that is, instead of me looking at, this is how I started also with the business, on what's necessarily friendly to an entrepreneur and also to the market. That's the lesson that I got also when I started the bake shop or the bakery, because that was also the space I was in. But I've learned my lesson that I think what matters more is for an entrepreneur like me to dig within, and then actually to ask a fundamental question. And that is, what type of problem can I actually solve? And when I say I can solve, that means it's a gap, it's a solution that I have provided in the past, and it's something that I have effectively done and have succeeded in terms of doing. So that's the first. And then the second, and by the way, this is the fastest in terms of really wanting to add value and eventually earn revenue, because there's a lot of gaps that we can see in the market today. So if we are just able to effectively identify that this is a particular gap that I can bridge, this is a particular gap that I can solution, then it's already an opportunity to start a business. But the second, which I think is more important, is the fire that also not really push us, but the fire that also inspires us to keep going. And that's usually called our passion. So how is this gap that I'm addressing? How is this interesting me? No, sorry. How is it relevant to me for me to actually wake up every morning and for me to work hard at it? So it's got to be something that sets me on fire. So those are the two things. And then eventually, that's when we would employ the area of being resilient, the area of being persistent, the area of being relentless. So those are the 3 points. Now, the problem that I can solve, is it a problem that I'm passionate about? And then, yes, to pull through and to be resilient.
Yes, I think I believe on that idea as well. Now, basing in your experience, you had your bakery before, and you said um, it was lucrative enough, but you think it failed as well. Do you think that an entrepreneur diversify or stick to one product of service line?
Okay. If it happens to be a new entrepreneur, so a newbie such as myself, it's, in my opinion, the better approach is to focus on one just yet. I also believed, this is the conservative side of me, that diluted focus also will yield diluted results. So we can venture into a lot of streams, we can explore a lot of streams, but there's got to be just one or two that we can focus, and that's where majority of where the revenue will have to come from, at least at the start. And then eventually, as we grow, that's when we can already start delegating those tasks. I'll use the bakery as an example because it's a small business. For the bakery, the area that I was not prepared was really on the area of, because I kept a full-time work. I had a full-time job at that time, and so I would work at the bakery during holidays and during weekends. And that's when I realized that when it comes to business ownership and accountability, that's something that we cannot just delegate. So even if I wanted it to be set up like a social entrepreneur project, an entrepreneurial project with the driver and the house help, but I could not fully delegate the accountability and the ownership of running the business. So a business would really require a business owner's focus. So it depends also on the amount of time that entrepreneur has. So that's why I would say that for those who are still starting up, it's best actually to just focus on one. And then when the opportunity and the possibilities would grow and present in the future, that's when the possibility and the opportunity to seize, to diversify. I think that's the route.
Okay. Um, what I've observed recently, those who make it uh, really made it in their business, they try to sell
Mm.
their business to a bigger company. Like for example, India,
Ah.
Mang Inasal, right? He is
Mm.
in the is he from Cebu or Iloilo?
Somewhere within the region, yes.
Yes. He I believe he is a realtor,
Mm.
and then he created Mang Inasal, who happens to be
Okay, I got it.
very lucrative, and then sold it
Mm.
to Jollibee, and now he went back to realty together
Mm.
with the Jollibee group.
Mm.
They created the Double Dragon, right? So is
Mm.
this a good way to diversify?
I think it depends on one's objective, no? So that's why I would always say the journey is it would always start from within. If the person's passion would be something to do with starting something new, creating something new, and then selling that to be operated and eventually to be run by somebody else, that's still a good path. No? Or in my case, it also entered my mind, no, if there would probably come a time that we would eventually, after creating this business and making it sustainable, we would also sell it. Not exactly very excited on that route because the objective that I have is actually to grow this business so that, yes, it can satisfy the first objective, the vision, which is to be a global Filipino company that's operated and owned and run by Filipinos. Second, it's also a tribute to the Filipino talents that we have because we definitely have a lot of potential entrepreneurs, but we just need to demonstrate it for them. And then number three, the bigger the business become, then the bigger the space is also for people who want to improve and better not just their lives but also their loved ones. So I'm more of scaling this one rather than selling this.
Okay, I'd like to talk about if is there any ideas for a blue ocean business, or is it too risky to try?
Sorry.
Is it any ideas for a blue ocean business,
Ah,
or is it too risky to try?
that's a good question. The better answer in principle, I would say go for the blue ocean. No, because that's where most of the potential big sales would be because there's little competition in that particular space. No? So that would be the theoretical answer to the question. But if I am to dig into my practical side, like for example, the IT BPM space that I am in, a lot of people would say that it's saturated because there's already a lot of IT BPM companies in the Philippines and also in Cebu in particular. But it's also but it's also a job that I have done for over 16 years. So that means that I have the right amount of acumen to actually be able to compete, even if we consider this as a red ocean. So it's something that I can say that I'm good at. And then second, it's also something that I consider to be a passion because of the advocacy that I also shared earlier. So for me, this is not just a business, but this is also like a calling. So because of those two, then I have enough reason to swim and to thrive in a red ocean space. So I think it ultimately depends on the appetite and also the objective of an entrepreneur, whether he or she would go where the blue ocean is or stay in the red ocean and be effective in managing and leading, no, the competition.
Okay, thank you very much. And you know, the entrepreneurs of yesteryears, this is how I know they deal with their business, their management style. They never delegate
Mm.
because they think that it is them who can solve every problem because it's their business. That they are the only ones who, care for the business because they build it from scratch. And is this still true to today's entrepreneurs? And what management style do you think is ideal for a business?
The good thing about entrepreneurs like me who also explored the corporate world is because we also come with the right balance in terms of implementing the tools and systems that actually work in our corporate experience and bring them now that we have a company of our own. So in my case, I'm more of a delegating leader because I've seen that also work in the companies that I have worked with. It's important for everybody to have a shared responsibility in terms of the success of the business. But I would also have to underscore, and this is also what I learned from my corporate background, that ownership and accountability, the buck actually stops with me. So I think that's a difference. So there's some sense of accountability which the leader needs to possess or the business owner needs to possess, but the rest of the responsibility and the potential success, the opportunities of success, this can be delegated. So I go for delegation. So my leadership style then, which I also brought from my corporate background, is situational leadership. So the delegation of responsibility, the delegation would primarily depend on the urgency of the situation and then the readiness and the ability of the person who we intend to delegate that role. So we would then be navigating through a range from being delegating towards really teaching and telling. No? So that's a broad we can navigate through depending on the urgency of the situation and the readiness of the leader or the readiness of the person that we wish to delegate a particular task.
Okay. And are there any pain points we can help our viewers avoid if they can as new entrepreneurs?
Pain points. It would still be looking for the right people to help us journey with. I think that's key. And part of people would be expertise and also leaders. That's key, for a particular business to succeed. I always thought that if we have the right set of people and we take good care of them, then we are going to avoid the pain point of having bad customer experience. It also comes from my corporate background that the manner and the way that we care for people will also be in direct proportion of the results that they deliver. So it can be a pain in terms of our customers' experience, but it can also be a pleasant one for them. So it depends on how we take good care of our people. So in the context of avoiding the pain, I would have to say that it's best that we care for our people so that they would be in a better position to also care for our customers and the business.
Okay. Thank you very much. Now, here's something that I'd like to ask as well. In the past few years, we had been through a lot, right? The pandemic. The pandemic is not a black swan event, but it was treated like one. So no one was really ready for it. And because of this, has the marketing of a business changed during
Mm.
the pandemic?
Well, a lot of the business So it's I would rather look at it. Of course, the pandemic is undesired, but it also created something or accelerated something that we would have been able to achieve in 5 years, no, but we were able to do that in a matter of months or even years, and that is bringing a lot of business to the digital space. In terms of, for I would my example for that is remote work. There was a time that it's highly debated whether people can be productive if they decide to work remotely, or if companies would allow people to work remotely. But of course, there was a lockdown, and there was little opportunity to even think through. It was just clear to everybody that people will have to shift work from office to home. And in a span of 2 months or 3 months into the pandemic, people realize that in general terms, employees are even more productive at work, at home, employees are even more productive at home compared to they were at the office. And the pandemic accelerated that. So that's one of the blessing in disguise, if we call it that way. The second also is because there was a lockdown and people could not physically be present in stores for consumers to buy goods or to have that exchange of goods between consumers and products. So the business also moved towards the digital space. And it opened a lot of opportunities for entrepreneurs like me, because part of the things that we do is actually digital marketing. And we wouldn't be in this space as well if this was not accelerated during the pandemic. So I would rather see the pandemic as undesired, yes, but I think it's also good for us to look at every situation, including a pandemic, on how we can still make the most out of that situation because we're already there. And for good entrepreneurs and leaders, that's a good mindset to have, because that would also move us from being victims into players.
Yes, I believe you. It accelerated a lot of things. One
Mm,
thing that I really enjoyed is, digital banking. Before, I am really afraid
agree.
to do this because of hacking, and I'm not really familiar. But right now, I'm always on my phone. I don't want to go to the bank anymore. I don't want to handle money. That's why I love Gcash and all those stuff. And yeah, you're correct. The pandemic did really accelerated everything. And thank you for that reminder as well. Now, how do we leverage the changes at best?
How can we leverage on the change that we
Yes.
needed to adapt, especially during the lockdown?
Uh-huh.
Okay, I think it starts with it starts with a good mindset. I think I noticed that at the start of the pandemic, there were at least two broad sets of people: those who were ranting on Facebook and social media, and those who were actually looking for ways to still thrive in even in such a challenging situation. And I think for those who made the effort to look for solutions and to thrive, then they were able to also adapt and succeed, even on a trying time such as a pandemic. So, to answer your question, I think it starts with having the right mindset. Uh, it's good to be cautious, but not to be paralyzed by fear, to always look for opportunities, to always look for possibilities, to always look for solutions. Because if we have that right mindset, then whatever happens to us eventually will happen for us. So that means we can make the most of whatever situation we have, whether it's good or bad. So it starts with the mindset.
Okay, very good. Yeah, mindset. I believe in that as well. Now, does some amount of insanity or optimism play a helpful
Mm,
role going into business? And I think that's where you're getting at a while ago.
yes. So yeah, I mentioned earlier, no, because during that, whether it's the pandemic or even under the usual the usual situation that we are in, it is good for us to be able to accurately identify whether what we are feeling is just being cautious, which is essential for being an entrepreneur, or whether it's already fear. So how can we distinguish the difference between the two? Being cautious is asking questions. Being cautious is doing due diligence, but it's coming from a space of wanting to move forward. Being afraid actually is asking questions like, what's happening? Is this going away? And then just staying there. So that's fear. And that's not the kind of mindset that we want to have, whether we are entrepreneurs or not. It's always good to ask the right questions, to do governance, to have the right amount of control, but the intent is to move forward. And that's also how entrepreneurs move towards that space, because a lot of us also have corporate backgrounds. It's a safe space actually, because rain or shine, we get to receive our salary, but our risk taking is also in direct proportion on how much risk and appetite the companies that we are working for actually would like to take, or the appetite that they have. So there's also a certain form of limit. So and if we are paralyzed in terms of the fear of actually moving forward towards the world of being an entrepreneur, then we will never be able to do that. So it's still good to be cautious, but not to be afraid.
Yeah,
I hope I'm making sense.
yeah. I
Yeah,
believe you. When you
yeah,
say not to be afraid, because if you're afraid, then that's where you will stop. You
yeah.
will never.
Mm,
Besides, behind those anxieties and your fright is
mm,
your goal. So you really need to
correct.
move.
So if I liken that, for example, on the decision to eventually leave the corporate world and decide to become an entrepreneur, so there were also questions that I had in my mind, which is quite typical for any person to have. So I was asking, what if this will not work? Uh, what if I will not be able to get enough funding for this one? So that's fear talking to me. So I moved that into caution. So okay, I what if I don't have enough funding? Then who will be the right people I will be talking to so that I should have enough funding? Or who are the right people I should be talking to so that I can also learn from their experiences? What do I need to learn? What are the controls that I need to put in place? So there's still an element of doubt there, but the intent is to move forward. And I think that's the difference between fear and caution. It's the element of wanting to move it forward.
Okay. Another question. I just want to know what you think about this. Unicorns. Do you
Mm.
think that most entrepreneurs today aim for that um, level to become a unicorn? What's your thought?
Being a unicorn is a good area to venture. That's usually where the blue ocean is. So it's also good to come up with something that's never been done before. So it's a good idea to have. It's also remarkable to be able to be the first to offer a particular product or service. That's also a good ideal to have. But the reason why I use the word ideal, because an ideal is something that we can work towards. But there are also certain gaps and certain solutions that we can already accomplish even with the current market. So that's why I would rather look at it more as an ideal, but I would also not an ideal, not okay, it's an ideal, but it's not supposed to keep me from already addressing the obvious gaps that I can actually find. Because as mentioned earlier, it starts with looking for the problem that I can solve. as an entrepreneur. So if I already can spot that, even with the current situation, I don't need to be the first, and I don't need to do a lot of something that's never been done before. All I need to do is just to demonstrate the capability of myself and also the company and what we can offer. So I see more of that as an ideal rather than something that I should pursue right here, right now. Unless, of course, if there's already an opportunity to do such.
Okay. DJ, I see you as a treasure trove of, information for entrepreneurship and business. So, what advice can you give our viewers if they really want to pursue, to take charge and become entrepreneur?
So, first is to separate caution from fear. No, it is okay to see what can potentially go wrong. It is okay to to check what are the things that we need to do. But the objective is always to move forward because that separates caution from fear. If our questions are actually keeping us from moving forward, then we are just mainly afraid. And we would not be able to successfully evolve from a corporate person to an entrepreneur if we are going to just allow ourselves to be governed by fear. So do not be afraid, just be cautious. The second also is there's also an amount of due diligence that we still need to do. I've I've also spoken to some of my colleagues in the past, and they also wanted to go into business. And I would always ask them, what's your product? Who is your customer? How can you advance your product to your market? What's your source of funding? And not many of them can actually provide reasonable answers. And I would always tell them that before venturing out into becoming an entrepreneur, the questions that I've been asking sounds more like a feasibility study. So don't skip that part because that will also, because the more we have the right information, then the more our decisions will also be sound. So that's my second advice. Number three, it's also good for us to have a good support system. In my case, I'm also fortunate because I'm part of a club. It's a Rotary Club of Cebu, and incidentally, it's also a club of entrepreneurs. So I got to listen to their experiences, their best practices, the things that have gone wrong, and the things that I should avoid. So it's good also to have a good system of support and to ask and not to hesitate to actually ask questions. And then after all this, then never give up, never say die. Always keep on keeping on, no? Because if it's really something that comes from a space of strength, and the business also comes from a strength of passion, then no doubt we are able to actually work and move forward until the bad becomes good and the good becomes better, and cliche as it sounds, the better becomes best.
Nice. Thank you very much for that wonderful reminders. And your Rotary Club is probably your Shark Tank.
Yes.
Now, you have any upcoming events or anything you want to invite our viewers?
No, actually, what I just have are the usual speaking engagements and nothing really big. So I would just like to invite everyone, our viewers, because they can also be potential collaborators and partners, to check our website. That it's xp-plus.com, and check our offerings. I think this is also a good opportunity for us to collaborate, whether in a form of investment or in a form of business partnership or having them as customers. So check our website, and that's it.
Thank you very much, DJ. And you made this wonderful day fantastic. I learned a lot from you. I'm sure the viewers have learned a lot from you. And if you want to ask, Darwin for other questions about entrepreneurship, you already know where to reach him. Now, thank you very much, Darwin, and hope to invite you again for another guesting in other topics that is relevant to today's society. Now, thank you very much for joining us today. And please click and like, subscribe, and share. And in episode 7, season 10, our guest speaker is a past district director of District 75 and distinguished Toastmaster Dorothy Dottie Isatu to talk about beyond leadership and communication. This has been your host, Sasi Casas, reminding you that learning is a never ending journey with limitless vistas. Good day.